Yeah, I get all the participants. I don't get any names. Okay. All right. I see let me just, all right. I guess everybody's going to be unmuted except the speakers. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's have a moment of prayer and silent reflection for the end of this virus pandemic, and hopefully we get back to some sense of normalcy and people don't abuse the little relaxing of restrictions. Let's see, our meetings are held on Zoom, and haven't heard anything yet about what's happening with the Fish Church, but hopefully at some point we will be able to get back. See if anybody has any questions or comments or anything that they want to discuss about it. Please feel free to contact any of us, and myself, Carl, Steve, and if you have any fellowship information, to contact Phil Schechter. I spoke to John yesterday. He's moved into his apartment, and he's getting settled. He waiting on getting a telephone hooked up. And interesting fact, he tried to get Frontier to give him phone service with his old number, and evidently they told him, well, his old number was a North Stamford number, and he got to get a downtown number. And but he's going to go to Optimum, and they're going to continue. They will give him his same number. So sometime after the first of the month, he should have landline phone service if anybody wants to contact them. Okay, moving on. Our board meeting will be next week at 1 o'clock. We'll end our meeting at noon, and then we'll have we'll break for lunch and bio break, and we'll convene at 1 o'clock with the board members. And so if anybody has any suggestions or questions that they want resolved, bring it up to any of the board members. They are all the officers, and we will certainly discuss it at the board meeting. Today's speaker is going to be Captain Mark Sticka. He's retired, and he's going to give us the history and future of the Connecticut State Police. He's still actively involved in their alumni association and as a speaker. So it should be very interesting. Please stay back, similar to what she did a little over a month ago. And I think that went well in regard to what's happening with the virus and with the financial situation. And then on the 11th, we're going to have Carlo Leone, our state senator from the 27th district, and he is going to speak on the state of the state. Somebody contacted me and mentioned that it should not be, it shouldn't be a political arena. And generally, when we've had any of our state representatives, we've had Scott Livy, they've been sitting members. they have not made it political, and Carlo is aware that it is not a political venue. It is just bringing us up to date on what's happening in the state, and I think now even more so with hopefully he can shed some light on what's happening with the corona situation. And then we've got a couple of meetings after that we're open on, and I'm trying to get some speakers. If not, we'll just revert to the slide, the videos that Greenwich had that we did with Mark Albertson.
So say, Joe, this is Carl. While we're on the subject, while we mentioned Lori Price, Joe Mattel tells me that Lori has offered to hold a series of Zoom seminars, not associated, not on the same time, same date as our meetings, and she would inviting the spouses of the aimed at women, financial interests and subjects and discussion groups and things like that. And we might want to discuss that at the board meeting, but I wanted the rest of the members to know that that was being offered. And if you have opinions on it, or you know your spouse be interested in, please let the board members know, and for our discussions. It sounds like a worthwhile offer. It's completely voluntary, so I don't expect any objections, but it is a very interesting concept.
Great. I think that would be of interest, and it might be something that might want to do maybe during July and August to keep connected. So yeah, definitely we should talk about that. So you want to bring that up at the board meeting. Okay, well, we missed the, there we go, Ira.
Good morning, everyone. Last week we had an online attendance of 70, and we have one guest, Steve Giacosi. I presume everybody's received the minutes, and if there are no additions, I'm going to leave it to Joe to deal with approval.
It's approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ira. Okay,
okay, I'm on. Before I do save the dates, usually when we're meeting in person, my first slide was always the 9 a.m. discussion group leaders. And I want to thank Joe D for a very interesting current events discussion leadership this morning. We do not have anyone scheduled for next week. I find these discussions to be very enlightening, thought-provoking, and gets us to see the opinions and commentaries by some of the members. So if anybody would like to lead a discussion next week and the week after, we can schedule it. So please send me an email with the subject matter, and hopefully somebody will step up. So now getting to save the dates. If you move to the next slide, the following have been postponed until further notice. The SMAS Day of Service. Canceled is the spring golf outing, which was supposed to take place, and the spring luncheon. As far as the spring luncheon is concerned, I have been informed by Rock Rimmon that they will be returning our deposit of $500. We have not made any collections, so nobody is out any money on that. I have not received it in the mail yet, but they did say it was coming, so looking forward to getting that. Postponed until the fall is the tennis tournament. Snoopy's got a good forehand there. And then in the summer, we do have scheduled the summer fishing trip. I don't see Mort. Mort, are you here today? No. Jim Dunn, you here? No. Bill McGare, you here? I don't think so. At any rate, it's scheduled for July 8th. The price is $60 per person. As you saw from last week's slide, it's a pretty big boat. And social distancing should not be a problem. The luncheon that usually went with this is not going to occur, so please bring a bag lunch or eat beforehand. Participation is limited to the first 10 signups, and Mort's contact information for registering is on this screen. So you can get in touch with him starting now, and so he can put you down, and look forward to everybody catching some big fish. Next slide. I got Carl's picture and not his slide.
There we go.
Okay, we're back on slides, but not yet to the one I need. Okay, there's Butke with a good flatfish. And I think that's Sandy Barocas with a nice, looks like, is that a striped bass? I don't know. But it's a nice sized fish. The annual picnic, Stu, you want to talk about it?
Sure. Morning, guys. So right now, for those who were not around last week, we're still on schedule. We still have a September 17th date at Cove Island Park. As you can see, the mayor, the caterer are still on our confirmed list. We also mentioned the fact that there won't be any parking issues this year. In this week's paper, the front page article indicated that there might be in a phase 2 or 3 possibility of opening up groups to as many as 100 people by late summer. So we're thinking that if you remember the place, probably around 20 tables. If we had, let's say, 2 couples at a table at diagonal ends, that puts them way more than 6 feet apart. We certainly could string out a serving line so that people are 6 feet apart, single serve kind of an effect where we could just serve everybody. It might take a little longer, but we can still do it. So if the restrictions are listed are removed and at 100 people, I think it's likely, and I discussed this with the committee just yesterday, that we could probably pull this off, assuming the laws are appropriate. So I'll ask you to vote yes or no right now. If we can do this, and the way I just kind of described, how many people again would attend? So raise your hand or say yes, and Steve will do the counting. Give you a couple of minutes to vote.
hit the green check mark. But one thing, Stu, the fact that we're not meeting in the summer, and it would have been no problem. Could you find out before our meeting, board meeting, if there'd be a problem switching to the 24th to give us an extra week in September?
The 24th?
Yeah, it'd be the following Thursday.
Just to push it out, any particular reason?
Yeah, just to give us an extra week.
An extra week.
September, because you're going to be September 3rd, we're, not going to meet. And you got the 10th and the 1 week. Effectively, at least it'll give us a couple of weeks.
All right, I can ask Frank. I'll check with Frank Fidel and ask him.
Well, with Frank and with George.
Right now,
Yeah.
we've got the 20 people that say yes, 7 that say no, and I guess the other
Yes.
Come on, guys, vote.
30 some odd people couldn't care less.
Larry here. You know, one of the things I think we should do with the board is talk about actually having meetings in August. I don't think
Yeah,
anybody,
that's an agenda. That should be an agenda item, Larry.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, what we're gonna do in the summertime.
and that would actually give us more time on, at least on the picnic and
Right.
other things. And, you know, it's not a big deal. And I don't think people are going to be doing a lot of traveling other places on long vacations. So might be something worthwhile for a group of guys to
Yeah.
Yep.
participate in. These
Yeah, at
kinds
least we, you know, just having the options to know that what we can or can't do, and then we'll make our decision. You know, we'll decide on next Thursday.
Okay. So moving along. If we had it, we probably wouldn't do the raffle. We probably won't do the silent auction. We'll see how the guys feel about wanting to ask restaurants, because maybe things might be better and they might be willing to do certificates. So that's iffy. We might do it. If we did it, I still would. The committee would like to still do the gifts if we could do that. But whatever happens, we're gonna wait until into July to make a final decision. Give us time to prepare. If we can't, and we can't do it live, then we'll do like we said last week. We'll just do a kind of an extended meeting. We'll have the mayor, maybe we get another speaker, something like that. So if you do any ideas, suggestions, or you think anything I said is a bad idea, please contact me at the email address there, stumadison@uponline.net. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and I'm off.
Thanks, Steve.
Next slide, fall golf outing, Monday, October 5th. Brian, Howie, anything to say at this point?
Nothing really from me. I'm just watching and waiting.
Okay. The only thing I can comment on is that the Sterling Farms Golf Course is the busiest place in town, and as far as I know, and my own experience, it is very easy to maintain social distancing on the course. Everybody seems to be following the rules. The only thing that might be a problem for us is they have now, depending on whether it's an odd day or an even day in the carts, either 90 days or cart path only. But perhaps that might be lifted by October. So
It
they have come
happens
back
to
in.
be, Larry. It's
What?
scheduled on an odd day. It's
Oh.
scheduled on an odd day,
Gotcha.
and the whole thing is going to come down to is the club going to want to come just for a golf outing, because it probably will not be a luncheon. We've always had a luncheon buffet, which is now not done anymore with the current situation. A seated dinner, seated lunch is going to throw the price way out of loop. And
Unless we have hamburgers.
well, even if you have hamburgers, the thing is, they're going to have someone to serve them. And whether the guys are going to feel comfortable sitting around a table.
Well,
All right, can I just,
think it's something
can I-
that will just keep
Howie,
it going for a while.
Howie, your points are well taken, but we're 5 months away from that now, so we're not going to be doing anything until September. So
Correct.
let's just see what happens.
You asked for our opinion, and we gave them.
the rules are going to change.
Yeah, they're changing weekly, so let's keep it on the agenda and see what happens by then. And I think I asked last week if we don't have the 30, if we have less, and it shouldn't make any difference. So let's not worry about it now. I mean, enough to worry about other than what's going to happen in October.
Right, okay. Monday, October 12th is the annual tennis tournament scheduled. And I don't foresee difficulties, and hopefully a lot of the restrictions will have been lifted by then. So next slide.
Carl,
I'll turn it over to you.
all right, before that, Steve, since I can't see who's coming on or not, let me know when Mark
Yeah.
gets on. Okay, Carl, go ahead.
Okay, on membership, we had a good month in May. We had 4 new members, and I've mailed out some additional applications, so there might be additional people joining by the end of the month, or hopefully in June. Are there any guests today online? Of course, now we have to find a way to unmute ourselves, but do any members know of any guests online? Okay, well, moving on. We haven't had a new member bio. This is one of our traditions. We haven't had one since early in March. And our new member, Alan Coulter, has agreed to do his bio today. A little unusual. I was looking for online for a picture of Alan, and I came across this information from Wikipedia. I'm not going to read it, but Alan's had a very interesting career, most notable of which, most familiar of which, is the first line here. He was the voice of The Late Show with David Letterman for 20 years. But I'll get out of the way and let Alan do his bio.
Thank you, Carl. I'm here, but I don't see. You just want me to talk over this, or can we see pictures?
I don't have any pictures.
Your picture's on.
No.
Stu hasn't been able to take pictures of people with these virtual meetings. So
okay, as long as people can hear me.
Smile.
Oh, I can see you too.
Oh, good.
I see. I should be able to get out of your way. Yeah, let me get out of your way, and you'll show up on. There we go. There we go.
There you go.
Speaker
Okay.
view.
I wrote this out because, as some of my friends there today know, if I just talk to you, it'd probably take about 20 minutes, and I was told I have 3. So I'll start out by telling you that I was born in Brooklyn. And then my second statement is going to be I was not born in Brooklyn. Actually, I was born in New York because my mother's uncle, an OBGYN, was at New York Hospital, and I think it cost her less to have me born there than in Brooklyn. But we lived in Brooklyn. And as a Brooklyn Dodger fan, it was cooler to say that I was born in Brooklyn than to say I was born in New York, even though I left at the age of 6 months. And I grew up in New York City and Little Neck and Cedarhurst. I've been a Stamford resident since 1976. My first job on the radio was for Strauss Broadcasting when I was 17 years old and at Hobart College. And then I did summers at WHLI near my home on Long Island as a music and newsman. And then to WTFM while I was teaching high school English, and then WHN in the early 70s. As some of you would remember, the names Herb Oscar Anderson was there at the time, and Jack Spector, Dandy Dan Daniels, Bill Mazer, Marv Albert. Brings back memory for those of us in our age category. And then came 20 years of voice and on-camera commercials. I've been the voice of 5. I was the voice of 5 cable networks, the announcer on network game shows, sports shows, news shows, and then 20 years with David Letterman.
Decorations.
My wife Peggy and I have 5 unbelievable grandchildren, which we share with one of your VPs, Alan Krim, and his wife Carol. Going to sports that I love and activities that I love. I love pro football. I'm an ardent New York Giants fan.
Yeah.
No baseball team has replaced the Brooklyn Dodgers, especially not the LA Dodgers. I love and miss March Madness. I enjoy televised PGA events and attempting to play golf in an ambitious attempt to approach mediocrity, which I haven't done and probably never will. I love well-written novels, biographies, escapist storytelling resulting in successful vengeance, In these last few months, Netflix and Amazon Prime have become good friends, and I've stopped buying wine and making inroads into enjoying what I already own. In retirement, I continue my involvement in charitable causes, now mostly in the tri-state area and Fairfield County, as the MC and auctioneer at annual fundraisers, including Silver Source, JFS, Bicultural Hebrew Academy, the JCC, Catholic Charities, and the Dominican Sisters of Blauville. I find it impossible and verging on a sin to say no to any member of the clergy who asks me to participate in these events. My wife is an ardent football fan, having gone to 23 Super Bowls, so it's nice to watch a baseball game. I know most of you are Giants fans, so to watch a football game with her. And lastly, I have my friend Larry Holzman to thank for introducing me to this organization, and I'll thank him or blame him in due course. I appreciate the welcome. Look forward to being with you for a long time.
Alan, welcome to our organization, and we hope that you will be an active member. And since you let on that you can't say no, we'll be asking you to say yes more often than not.
Only if you're a member of the clergy, Carl.
Well, we got Phil. Phil, where are you? You're up next. We'll let Phil ask you. Thank you, Alan.
And Alan, my pleasure to have introduced you to the group.
No, our guest speaker is here.
Oh, thank you.
Who's the one who got him in?
Larry Holtzman.
You know him?
Yeah,
Nice.
everybody knows. He's a very nice guy. I'll show you his picture.
Does he live near
All
there?
right, all right. I'm going to mute everybody because we're getting background. Bill, let me get you up.
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
I have no news that has been given to me up till this moment. So, guys, it's up to you if you want to share something about someone you know or yourself. Good news is always welcome. Unfortunately, we have a lot of bad news every day just simply by turning on the news when we get up. So anybody have any news about our members?
Phil, it's Jerry Kranz talking. Warren Hayes, after over 2 weeks in the hospital for surgery and rehab, is at home. I spoke with him this morning. He came home yesterday, and he's absolutely delighted to be home and recovering.
Thank God. Good. Alan Coulter, I am clergy, so watch out. Anybody else with any news they'd like to share? That was good news. Everybody's very
Question for you, Phil. Did you arrange for our guest, one of our guest speakers?
Yes, two of them, in fact.
Okay.
The last two.
All right. So let me know what date, which are the dates.
Who's asking?
Joe. And Brianna.
Yeah, oh, hi, Joe. Oh, you mean?
You were gonna have your daughter?
Yes, if we need a speaker, she's a chaplain in the Air Force in Germany, and I think it would be very interesting to hear what she has to say about the virus in the military, the virus in Germany, and being Jewish in Germany at this particular time. I think she'd make a good speaker.
Okay.
Even though she's in Germany, through the magic of Steve Fisher, we'll be able to do it.
Super. Okay, so just give me which are the dates in after the 11th of June. We've got the.
Okay, I'll be back in touch with you.
Thank you. Okay.
Joe, are you there? You look frozen. Dick Harper, are you here? Okay. Carl, you want to continue with the slides here? I don't know what happened to Joe.
This is Alan Crimslide. Is Alan online?
Hey, yes, I am.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead with an overview on electricity supply. Time for our semi-annual update. Eversource very recently announced a 7.38 cent rate for the July-December 6-month period. The prices are continuing a downward trend, likely driven by the lower cost of natural gas. On the other hand, the market prices provided by alternate suppliers versus Eversource have tightened somewhat. So there's a reduced savings opportunity. We do recommend at this point signing up with Town Square, which is providing a 6.64 cent per kilowatt hour, about a 10% save on the electricity supply over the next 6 months. Their rate does hold for 6 months, and it includes no early cancellation fees. So it would allow you, if any other providers come along at a lower cost, you could switch to them if it made sense and you were interested in doing that. Of course, if you are in a lock-in period with another supplier does have a cancellation fee, wait for that to expire before you make a switch. Is there any question? All right, thank you.
Okay, this is Carl. Thank you, Alan, for what he's done. As Alan pointed out, that the differentials are shrinking, but you may have also noticed from the numbers Alan showed on the screen, this is a good time of the year to be changing suppliers because it looks like it's a low, at least a seasonal low, if not a low for the last few years with the current prices. And what I'm suggesting as an alternative to the lowest price offered that Alan has identified is suggesting the members might consider an alternative source, Clearview Energy. As you can see from this slide, the electricity generated by wind power has been increasing steadily over the years and currently displaces approximately 42 million cars worth of CO2 emissions. So Clearview is slightly more expensive than Town Square, but based upon the numbers provided on the energyconnecticut.com website, for only $1.87 more a month than Town Square, you can get 100% wind power and the benefits that provides for the environment. If you're interested, please go to clearviewenergy.com or contact me if you want additional information. While I've got the microphone, a lot of you, maybe most of you, are aware that some of our members have been doing our AARP tax aids who prepare tax returns for low income and senior people. Our program has been disrupted this year by the COVID-19 crisis, but we have gone back online again through a sister organization, VITA, Volunteers in Service to America. And if you, family members or friends would like to take advantage of free tax preparation by AARP people, all you have to do is go to the Darien Library website, which is, the ID location is on the bottom of the screen. It's just darienlibrary.org. and go to where this red arrow indicates on their website, click on text preparation of file, and there's instructions on how to upload your forms to a encrypted, secure website, and to start the process of having your a free text preparation by a tax aid preparer. Okay, thank you.
Joe, are you back on?
Yeah, just pretty much getting there now.
Larry here, just an item for discussion. Obviously, we have on these Zoom meetings anywhere from 60 to 70 people. When we were meeting in person, we used to get 100 to 125 people. Does anybody have any ideas as to why and what we can do to increase the participation in these Zoom meetings?
This is Steve. I'm assuming some of it is due to people not being able to figure out how to do it. But
Yeah, I got a call from Bob Dreesen. He's having trouble getting on. He's been trying all morning.
while we're talking about Zoom, Zoom has upgraded their software to version 5, which I encourage everyone to upgrade to. Starting, I believe, next week, they will be doing a different type of encryption on their service. And if you don't have version 5, you may have problems getting connected.
How do you get version 5?
You can just go out to Zoom and download it. Bill, you still haven't fixed your audio.
Oh, Bill.
Okay. Let's see. We have.
Joe, could I speak for a moment, please? Address. Carl mentioned, rather Larry mentioned, how do we get people to come? Perhaps a reminder email coming, say, Wednesday night, rather than just on Sunday, which we normally get our weekly notices.
You also get one on Wednesday.
Wednesday night, right, would be.
No, it goes out Wednesday morning.
It's almost like the doctors say, call the day before your appointments as a reminder, because many times people forget and they're doing something else and they don't think about the meetings until it's practically over.
The second notice goes out Wednesday morning or early afternoon, depending upon when I get the slides.
I have a question for Larry, if you have a moment.
Sure,
Maybe it's
Larry.
answered. Somebody contacted me and asked about refunds for the show. I think it was South Pacific, but I don't remember if that, and for the luncheon. How is that being handled, Larry?
That is going to be taken up at next week's meeting.
Fine, thank you.
Board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
If there's no other discussion items, I was working on a design for an SMAS mask, considering whether our social distancing and face mask requirements will continue for a while. And then Bob Loop showed me an alternative to this for the more style conscious people. Hopefully everybody can hear this. It's not your computer. I believe this gentleman is speaking Italian, but the message is pretty clear.
If you're serious about the face mask with the logo, have contact Joel Brest. He might our group, supplier might be able to do something there.
Bill Monco, we still can't hear you.
Okay. All right, it's that time, and Mark Sticka is here, and
Do I need to put my mask on, Joe?
yeah, but except when you speak, I'll give you a little brief bio. Captain Sticka is a 26-year veteran of the Connecticut State Police and was previous commander of the Connecticut Statewide Narcotic Task Force. He served as a patrol trooper, academy instructor, and both as a patrol and administrative sergeant. His commands as lieutenant included several troops, Major Crime Squad, Internal Affairs, Criminal Justice Information System, Traffic Services, State Police Academy, and Area Commander. He was the acting district commander of the Western District before his retirement last year in August. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Bridgeport this fall. He served on several panels regarding contemporary issues facing law enforcement relative to drug use and abuse. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Westfield State College, a graduate certificate in law enforcement education from the University of Virginia, and a master's degree from Columbia College, South Carolina. He's earned several department awards and is a graduate of the FBI National Academy Session 260. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend Mark Sticka. Mark?
Hi, Joe.
You're
Thank
on.
you. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be with you all today. Joe had asked me a few months back if I could do a presentation relative to the history of the state police and or my career. And one of the functions that I perform in retirement is I'm an active member of the Alumni Association. I'm the secretary for the State Police Alumni Academy Education Foundation. We have given out close to $500,000 in scholarships to sons and daughters and grandsons and daughters of troopers over the last 40 years. It's usually on average of $10,000 a year that we give to those deserving students as we encourage them to further their education at the college level. And part of that alumni association is also being a member. I'm a grant writer now for the Alumni Association Museum and Education Center, which is located in Meriden, Connecticut. If anyone wants to visit, it's at 294 Colony Street in Meriden, Connecticut, usually open on Fridays and Saturdays in the afternoon. And as a docent there, as well as being the grant writer, I have some very interesting photographs, historical photographs, which I'm going to share with you today as part of the presentation. And you can see much more of that at the museum. And I'll be highlighting this book that is written by our president and the president of the Museum Association. It's the Images of America, Connecticut State Police by Jerry Longo, and President Longo supplied most, if not all, of this information relative to the presentation. So I'm going to try and share the screen here. Am I able to do that? Here we go, share screen. All right. Okay. Are we up on a full, on my screen, it's a full PowerPoint?
Looks
On
good.
your screen, is it a full
Good.
PowerPoint?
Looks good.
Yep.
Okay. So this is the history of the Connecticut State Police, founded in 1903. Coincidentally, the first troopers went into service, it'll be 117 years ago, 117 years ago tomorrow. May 29th is the official first day of the Connecticut State Police. And we do this presentation for our trainees to make sure that they are aware of their history, to make sure of their reliance on abilities, their family support, academy and their staff, but not to make them not forget that 3.5 million people here in Connecticut and visitors are relying on them to keep them safe, to keep them protected. And from 1903 until today. And it was on May 15th that Governor Chamberlain signed a bill, and Commissioner Egan was our first officer and first commissioner. And from there, 5 members out of a list of 60 were chosen May 29th, 1903 to begin service. And those are our first 5: Merrill Lukes, William Clark, Frank Barnes, John Flynn, and William O'Brien of New Haven. And that would be the closest to this area, right? Or Bethel was somewhat close. You'll see that all of those were along the train lines. And that was the primary mode of transportation back in 1903, and really right up until the middle tens. Train and sometimes horse would get us there where we had to be. And look at this first budget, $13,737. Our operating budget in the state police when I left was about $180 million. So you can see that it's grown exponentially in 117 years. And that budget was offset by fines. And you can see $8.91 per day was how the department ran. There was no formal training back then. It was really appointment by who you knew, who they thought was going to be a good investigator or a good enforcer of the laws at the time. Private citizens. That community policing aspect really grew back in the early 1900s because it was a reliance on the eyes and ears of the citizenry to help out keeping the community safe. That neighborhood watch mentality was very strong then, and it was just a few men at the time that were within the state police guarding those unincorporated towns, something which we do today. And I know down here in Fairfield County, most people's thought process and perception of a state trooper is that concrete cowboy driving up and down the highway giving out tickets. And down here in the Fairfield County, where there are incorporated towns with established police departments, yes, 95 and the Parkway are the domain of the state police. Get out into those rural areas, we are still responsible as primary law enforcement for 82 of the 169 towns in the state of Connecticut. The first homicide investigation that we investigated as the state police took place in 1906. A woman in Stafford was killed by a boarder. And, fast forward to today in full circle, a college student in Willington, just one town away from Stafford, was just apprehended yesterday in Maryland after horrifically murdering 2 people, one in Stafford, one in Ansonia, I believe, before escaping to New Jersey, then Pennsylvania, and finally being caught in Hagerstown, Maryland yesterday. Typical arrests in the 1910s was arrest for liquor. A man had 300 bottles of beer that were outlawed and several kegs. His fine was $300. I don't think much has changed relative to that, but you can see how stiff the penalties were there because of the focus on alcohol enforcement, prohibition, and those types of crimes at the time and where they sit now. And within the first 10 years, the legislature increased our responsibilities to include the fire marshal's office, inspections of movie houses, weights and measures, driving tests, billboards, weapons permits, boat and vehicle enforcement. Many of these responsibilities the state police still has today. Others have been either phased out, civilianized, or taken over by other departments, such as driving tests and boat and vehicle enforcement. Driving tests are done by the Department of Motor Vehicles. Boat and vehicle enforcement done by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or the Environmental and Conservation Police, as they're officially known. Motorcycles were in vogue, especially in the 1910s and the 1920s. That was the troopers' primary mode of transportation. If you come to the museum, we have one of these two 1911 Hendersons on display at the museum, which is pretty neat. Why somebody kept it around for that long is still beyond our thought process. Hey, why is people keeping junk around? But thankfully they did, because we do have a very impressive and far back reaching museum to include one of these Hendersons. Not too many people knew that there was a woman in the state police as far back as 1913, and that was Zola Bennett. Certainly wasn't the first woman in law enforcement, but was in the state police. She wasn't officially a trooper or a state officer, as they were known back then, but she wasn't exactly just a support clerk either. She did some investigations. More women were hired to act as matrons during World War I, and again in World War II, as you'll see going forward. Those times of war yielded our auxiliary program. Those times of war yielded civilian cooperation like no other times in our history. Troopers, or back then state police officers, were not uniformed until 1921. So that's 18 years that they were plainclothes investigators investigating those crimes and those violations relative to the fire marshals and the movie enforcement and the alcohol enforcement. But a uniformed police force started in 1921. Those uniforms then were really modeled after the military uniform of the day, or de rigueur as they called it. You'll see the evolution, especially with state police uniforms, mirroring military uniforms and vice versa. The Massachusetts State Police, which you'll see a picture of a trooper in here in a little bit, their uniforms were adopted by Adolf Hitler for the uniforms that they chose for the stormtroopers, which is kind of an interesting take. The California Highway Patrol, their uniforms were uniforms that were left over from the war, that were on surplus, that they formed into their uniforms. And to this day, even though you see those tan uniforms that you saw on the program chips that they still wear to this day, their formal dress uniform is an olive drab green Ike type jacket that were originally left over from World War II that they utilized because they were not funded for uniforms. Our uniforms evolved from what this is, the Marine tunic collar, to what we have today, and you'll see that progression as we go forward. Pearl Roberts was our first trooper that was killed in the line of duty, and you're going to see a commonality with the first 5 or 7 or so troopers that were killed in the line of duty. He died in a motorcycle accident at the Yale Bowl following the Yale-Harvard game. His great-grandson is a trooper assigned to headquarters today and serves on the honor guard for formal events. And you can see Pearl's Army uniform that he was wearing. That's not his state police uniform, but you see the similarities between the troopers of the day and the troopers in the military, as it were. And that's where that term trooper comes from. In the 1940s, the term of the day, or the term de rigueur, as you'll hear referred to within our history, was relative to that esteem, that dignity and importance of title that was bestowed upon the fighting soldiers during World War II. It seemed appropriate as the Connecticut State Police adopted the mantra as being soldiers of the law. And that's part of our code of honor, that I am a Connecticut State Trooper, a soldier of the law. To me is entrusted the honor of the department. And you can see the department expand in the 20s as a uniform force was established. The department's strength was 50. One of the members of the class of 1922 was a circus employee who was the strongman. And there he is right there. Those were the official cars of the day, a Model T. Troopers back then lived in the barracks with 2 days off per month. They drove with their tops off year round on those Model Ts. I can't begin to tell you the price that many of them paid for that and for driving those motorcycles, as we discussed. And here is a trooper of the day in the 20s making an arrest. There was no union protections as many officers have today and enjoy today. There was summary dismissal. If you did something wrong, there was no resignations, you were just terminated. No union, no job. You see how that has grown today to much of the dismay of many people in the public who wonder, why is it that an officer commits a violation but stays on the payroll, stays on the force until an investigation is completed before being terminated, before being brought up on charges. A lot of that has to do with the union protections that they enjoy, that due process is in place. There was no due process back in the early days. Bartholomew Skelly was also killed in a motorcycle accident. Driver never came forward, still unsolved. We had our first photographer in 1926, and he was sent out to photograph crime scenes and accident scenes. This is one of the early accident scenes. 1926, third degree could bring disciplinary action. So if you brought somebody in for questioning and you subjected them to torture, physical harm, as was kind of okayed back then, the state police would bring disciplinary action on you. So we might have been ahead of our time with getting rid of the old style of policing. But you could wear civilian clothes, they could be approved on duty, and your dry cleaning was taken care of. You had a cook at the barracks as well. State police was involved with the Lindbergh baby kidnapping and eventual homicide. And there's a lot of memorabilia related to Charles Lindbergh at the museum in that particular investigation. Irving Nelson was our first officer that was murdered in the line of duty. He was a World War I vet. His wife was expecting. He was shot off his motorcycle by fleeing felons. So again, that motorcycle comes into place. Lloyd Euchers was killed on his motorcycle. You start to see that motorcycle being the commonality with many of these line of duty deaths. And it was for a long time, beginning in the 30s and moving forward until almost the 60s and 70s, that we stopped using the motorcycles because they were dangerous, not only to ride, but they didn't offer a whole lot of protection, especially dealing with these felonious stops. California Highway Patrol continues to use motorcycles, and the majority of their line of duty deaths are folks in motorcycle accidents. So it's such a great tool for specific events, but for general patrolling, motorcycles are really not a good way to go because they are so dangerous. This is one of our first recruit classes. The formal training back then was 3 weeks. Today, the formal training is 30 weeks plus 8 weeks on a field training officer program once you graduate from the academy. Stanley Helberg was killed on a motorcycle training at the academy. First big seizure in state police history at the Westbrook Barracks. The Nightingale is seized in a bribe attempt of $500, and that $500 bribe attempt yielded a $50,000 boat, $50,000 in booze, and 27 arrests. Here's a look at one of the early academy photos. There's a instructor at the academy and one of the recruits in the back doing calisthenics for the morning. I don't know if you noticed that first bunch of uniforms had the letter SP on the shoulder as a shoulder patch for state police. This gentleman here, he has what is now emblazoned state police in an oval type patch upon the shoulder. And that's the first evolution of the 5 evolutions of the state police patch. 1932, we're in the middle of the Depression. There's crime waves. We have 11 department openings because the budget was only allowing for 11, and we had 3,000 applicants. Those large numbers of applicants for small jobs continues to this day. In one of our processes in a not too distant past, we had 10,000 people apply for what ended up being 80 jobs or an 80-person class. You see the old Tommy guns that were issued to each trooper or police officer or state police officer back in the day. One of those Tommy guns is on display at the State Police Academy, and there's another one that's on display at the State Police Museum. The museum has a pretty extensive cache. The building that they're in right now used to be the organized crime building. It was a standalone building because of the sensitivity of organized crime investigations. They had several storage sites, including a vault, and that vault was converted to a vault for our display weapons. So they're very secure, and each one of them has a historical significance to the department. Early fatal accident crash that the state police investigated in Westbrook. Trooper Lionel Poirier's favorite memory was a signed $1 bill by Amelia Earhart. He donated, or his family donated, that $1 bill to the museum, and that is on display at the museum. Amelia Earhart made a stop here in Connecticut during many of her flights throughout the country and eventually throughout the world before her disappearance. Leonard Watson, October 23rd, was killed after a spill from his motorcycle, again at the Yale Bowl, again at the Harvard-Yale game. Trooper Walter Foley is singularly responsible for the beginning of the K-9 program, one of the first in the country, and continues to be one of the foremost, not only in the country, but in the world. We've held over 250 K-9 classes for patrol K-9s, fire detection K-9s, drug detection K-9s. We even have K-9s now that will sniff out guns, and electronic computer software is the latest version. We've had folks from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, from all of Europe, South America send their officers with their K-9s to the State Police Academy to get the training for their K-9s and go back to their respective departments. They hold probably 4 to 5 K-9 classes a year for different disciplines. And you'll see Walter Foley, he singularly brought that in with the first Bloodhound, and we continue to have Bloodhounds, and that's Texas right there. He's kind of a famous puppy for us. He was lost from his handler a couple years back and was rescued about 3 days later after breaking loose from his leash. And his handler, Ed Anazuski, just retired in April of this year. We were sad to see him and Texas go, but they had a great career together. So this is a Connecticut trooper with a Massachusetts trooper, and you can see the similarities between those military uniforms. As we stated, especially the uniforms that were adapted by the SS in Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s. Back in the 30s, full disclosure here, at current, I am 5'4" and 149 pounds. You probably can't see that through the Zoom, which makes me look bigger than I should be, which is great for me. But if I was a trooper in the 30s, I would not be a trooper in the 30s. I came from Massachusetts before I moved to Connecticut, and I was still living in Massachusetts in the academy before we had to establish residence 4 months in, so I wouldn't have been eligible there. I was 24 when I started, so I would have been eligible for that. I certainly was not 5'9" to 6 foot barefoot, and that was very specific, 5'9" to 6 foot. If you were under 5'9", if you were over 6 foot, you couldn't get into the academy. I had a academy classmate that was 6'8", and I was obviously the smallest one at 5'4". 155 with 200 pounds with normal vision, sense of smell, and they had to pay for their own physical to get onto the department. 1940s, our department's priorities was national defense, public safety, and first aid training. We were back home. Many of our men were drafted for military service, so an auxiliary force was started and grew to almost 800 auxiliary troopers. They were volunteers, they were uniformed, and they would supplement patrol while our numbers were down because of the responsibilities that some had as active military and in support of active military at various military installations throughout the state of Connecticut. Connecticut was a potential target for the Axis forces for, aggressive action against the United States. And there were some Marines that were captured off of the coast of Connecticut back in the 40s relative to what was going on with World War II. 1941, we had our first two-way radios. We had the auxiliary program. It grew to 2,200 folks by 1945. We had 44 men and 38 civilians that were deployed at the time of a force of about 400. So you can see that that took a toll on our department, a 10% reduction plus the added responsibilities relative to national defense. First two female state policewomen were officially sworn in 1941, and they weren't troopers. They had limited powers. And as a matter of fact, this photo is very famous. It sits at every barracks at the in the state. It's at the museum. It's at the academy. I will tell you that it was a quasi-fraud because these ladies were not issued uniforms. They were given the tops and had some skirts that were made up for recruitment and propaganda photographs for the 1940s. But they did not own those uniforms. They were borrowed for the photo shoot and immediately given back. They were non-uniformed women who would investigate mostly juvenile and those types of crimes. But they were allowed to use the Tommy guns in training, so they did get that benefit. Charles Hill was killed in the town of North Canaan in 1941 directing traffic. And you look at those uniforms from the 1940s, there was a mishmash of different uniforms because they were transitioning from the Marine collar tunic to a more practical uniform. You still see breeches and puttees on some of the troopers. You see pith helmets on some of the troopers because that was de rigueur for the time based on the military action and the support of national defense. We had boats, speedboats. They were used for a plane crash in the Connecticut River. An SP diver would be killed a short time later rescuing somebody. There was 30 caliber machine guns mounted on the state police boats during World War II. And this was in part because of the defensive stance that the department took. There was sub bases in Groton. There were military bases in New Haven and throughout Connecticut that had to be protected. Officer Edward Jesmith was killed responding to a crash. He slid his car in the rain and crashed into a tree, responding to call of duty in the 40s. This is a photo of an accident, not Trooper Jesmonds. The resident trooper program. So this is something many Fairfield County residents may or may not be familiar with, as their perception of the state trooper is that trooper on the highway that is doing traffic enforcement. But the unincorporated towns relied on the state police for years and continue to. In the borough of Pine Meadow, in the town of New Hartford, place where I started, up in North Canaan Barracks, Jim Parrott was the first resident state trooper. And what that meant was the town supplemented the trooper's salary and benefits so they could have him in the town full-time as the representative of that town's police department, if you will. They work directly under the first selectman of those towns. They report to the barracks, but they are confined to the town, work on community policing within the town, and are really the go-to person. Currently, we have 54 towns that are covered by resident state troopers with the assistance of town-appointed constables. Kenneth Stevens died during a boating patrol accident of a heart attack after a dive on D-Day, June 6, 1944, during a national security patrol. Shortly after there in 1944, the circus fire in Hartford, the Great Circus Fire as it's known, left 168 dead, more than 500 injured. The Fire Marshal's branch of the Connecticut State Police was responsible for the investigation of that tragic event in Connecticut history. The academy, again, was about a 3-week-long training session, and this is the regimen. Calisthenics at 6:30 and then breakfast, classes from 8 until 5, classes after dinner, lights out, and they stayed there during the weekend. The troopers now go home on Friday nights, but this exact academy regimen exists to this day, with the exception that wake up is at 5:30, and calisthenics might be done during the day and not immediately before breakfast, or it depends on how in shape the barracks is, because if the barracks is not in shape, it might be upon that instructor or that drill sergeant that morning to decide the barracks isn't clean enough, so we're going to go for a little run to get you motivated to clean a little bit better. More to come on that. Our first radar tickets were issued in 1948. So radar has been around for that long, and you see Commissioner Danaher there in 2008 with Trooper Gedney, giving him a proclamation of his appreciation. Trooper Gedney was, I believe, 100 years old when he passed, and at one time was the oldest trooper in the country. We've had that distinction a few times, the last being Ed Steele, who was the class of 1944 and was with us up until, I think, 4 years ago. He died at the age of 103 and held the distinction of being the oldest living state trooper in the country at the time of his death. Can you solve the murder here? Can everyone see that? There's two folks that are down here, and this is taken from the 1940s. What do we think happened here? I think you might have to unmute yourself if you'd like to. I think I see Stu was moving his lips.
Murder, suicide.
Yeah, I agree.
Ira and Stu both say murder, suicide.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, you are correct, and we know that because of the entry wounds and the exit wounds on these bodies. They were onto the right side of the wife's head, the right side of the male's head. So we'll go back here. Who did what to who?
She killed him, then she killed herself.
Yeah, she killed him and she killed herself. You would think the other way around, but because of how she's laying on the bed and where the gun fell, if he had shot himself, the gun would have been on the other side of him in most normal circumstances. Instead, it was right where she would have been standing and eventually fallen on the couch. So that's good. Interactive, a little training there. You guys are right on, right on. Frank Starkel was a lieutenant who was on duty, and they were doing some blasting, and a stray rock from a quarry in Glastonbury traveled almost a half mile and struck and killed Frank Starkel. So you never know the dangers that are out there, even on a job that seems innocuous as keeping people a half mile back from a blast site. Thinking he's in a safe place, he ends up getting killed by a rock that flew from this blast site at what was determined to be a safe distance, or thought to be a safe distance. Wire services connect Massachusetts, Connecticut, the New York, and the FBI shortly before 1950. And it's the start of the National Crime Information Computer and that type of communication, which just puts law enforcement into another era and another level of excellence. And the first use of that was the Woodbury Bank robbery. There's some great classic footage, old television shows relative to this, and you know, they will play this at the Museum and Education Center. It's about a 15-minute vignette, but it was taken from an NBC show that was on back in the 60s about the Woodbury Bank robbery. And as they say, you might be able to outrun a trooper, you might be able to outrun a car, but you can't outrun a Motorola radio. And it was because of that radio transmission that these Woodbury Bank robbers were caught in Bethany after escaping shootout with the state police in Woodbury. Here's the wage for a trooper, $1.12 an hour for a 60-hour work week with no overtime. In 1951, they were down to 300 troopers, 10 state police women, and 174 civilians. Women trained with the 22s, and the men carried a 38 because it was thought that the 38s were too heavy. And as Jerry says, he just writes it, he doesn't make it up. These are actual codified in memoriam old manuals that we have at the museum that state these things. And there you see the women at the range with the target match, which was won by us at the New England camp with the other New England State Police, agencies and their state police women. Arthur Hess was one of our first Medal of Honor winners in the early 1950s relative to a shootout that he survived. Unfortunately, Ernest Morse also received the Medal of Honor, called the Medal of Valor back then, but it was awarded posthumously as he was fatally shot by a suspect. The suspect captured quickly, said the rosary before dying. Took the jury 1 hour to submit that man to the electric chair. 50 troopers knelt to do the rosary for that World War II hero. That was Ernest Morse. And a medal was issued during the class graduation, and his widow was awarded $1,000 a month and the child $16 a month. And with Trooper Morse, it was a group of sailors who were coming back from Groton who tailed the bad guy, called it in, and kept watch on him before he was captured by troopers. So that connection between the state police and the military was strong then and remains strong now. This is our first lie detector or polygraph machine, the Stoling Deceptograph. It's a kind of a neat name, right? A little clever. The Deceptograph to detect deception. It was purchased for $1,500. First operator were Sergeant Doyle and Trooper Reimer. Trooper Reimer was the son of Major Reimer, and there is a pretty famous Connecticut or Saturday Evening Post cover with then Lieutenant, eventually Major Reimer, looking over his shoulder of his 1941 Ford in kind of disgust because he's hit a flat tire. And that is what is depicted on the cover of the Post. A polygraph machine nowadays costs about $25,000, and they have to be repurchased about every 5 years. One of the last things I did before I left selections and training, before taking over narcotics again, was to purchase 4 more of these, because our current polygraph machines at the time were 10 years old and were not as reliable as they could have been. They were reliable with the results. They weren't as reliable turning on and turning off. The Smith & Wesson Identikit, or that police sketch artist, came to become very popular in the 60s. Trooper Tim Kelly was our first identigraph, but the first kits only did male composites. I think females commit crimes, as we saw in the practical exercise back then. Females will commit crimes just as well as male commit crimes. And these were what those identigraphs look like. You would do sketch artists, they had the foldovers, and you can see how pretty accurate a sketch artist can be with the actual suspect in a case. James Lambert was killed by a DWI suspect, and to this day there's a Lambert Award that goes to Connecticut citizens, specifically Connecticut citizens under the age of 21 that commit brave acts in help of Connecticut citizens. They're not police officers. These are exceptional young men and women. We've had some people that have rescued people who were drowning, rescued people who were in fires in homes. The latest in keeping in trends of technology and what is going on in the world today. We had somebody last year receive an award for calling out a child sexual predator who was harassing a friend of hers on the computer. The friend was too frightened to make a complaint about that. Her friend did it on her behalf and took a pretty serious child predator out of circulation for a long time because of her actions. 1961, Albert Washington is the first African-American trooper. He was an exceptional gentleman. He was only the second of our 800 officers who was bilingual at the time. He was a Navy SEAL, and he had to endure a lot of hardship, as many police departments were not keen to hiring African Americans. His level of education, his level of dedication, the fact that he was a Navy SEAL really solidified the hiring of him, because otherwise it was skeptical that an African American, unfortunately, because of the times, was accepted as a police officer and especially as a state trooper. He blazed the way for several great African American troopers, to include our colonel at the time of my joining the state police, Colonel Joe Perry. We have an aviation unit. Our aviation unit has grown over the years, from borrowing helicopters and test helicopters from Sikorsky to having what we have now, Trooper One, a specially designed Bell helicopter that has been in service since the year 2000. Joe Stoba was shot at a domestic. Joe was a resident state trooper, was very familiar with the suspect. And what Joe ended up doing was letting the gentleman go back into the house to retrieve a sweater. And he came out with a shotgun instead. Joe's nephew just retired from the state police a couple of years ago as a sergeant in major crimes. In the 60s, we used a Navy ship down in Groton as our academy because we didn't have an actual building. And it was called a floating class because it was held on a ship. Ray Watts was part of that class. I worked with Ray. He did 45 years, the longest serving state trooper. We were involved with the Green Man Albert DeSalvo case, a sexual predator in the 60s. The Peanut Butter Bandit, as many of you may have heard of, he's very famous. Not only did he eat the peanut butter when he went to people's houses, somebody snuck in a file in a peanut butter to have him escape. 60s brought civil disobedience. You see troopers in riot gear. We unfortunately see officers dealing with that in Minneapolis last night, the night before, because of unrest due to police brutality. Grateful Dead Clubhouse was raided in 1969. You see the cooperation with the community. Tumultuous times. SOCTIF, the Organized Crime Task Force, is born out of the 70s and 80s. And since you guys showed a naked picture, I guess I can show a naked picture. NCIC takes on in the early 70s. You see our dive unit expand. The height requirement, thank you to George Constantine, was eliminated in 1976. George was 5'7". He was a Navy pilot, and they wouldn't let him on the state police until he sued to say, just because I'm 5'7" doesn't mean I can't do the job. And then they got stuck with me. And you can see that pay has increased a little bit. And there's one of our helicopters. Carl Moeller was struck and killed. His canine had to be retrieved from his vehicle in 1976 by other officers, and that posed a problem because canines are very protective of their handlers. Fortunately, someone from the kennel came up and took care of that for him. In 1977, our first 4 female troopers, it doesn't seem like it should have waited that long to happen, but it did. They were officially troopers. They were full-fledged troopers, not state police women. Graduated. One would rise to the rank of lieutenant colonel. That was Marge Culpa. At one time, we had the most female troopers per capita in the country. So in the 1980s, wiretaps, organized crime, anti-subversives were in vogue. The shooting of Trooper LaMonica in New Jersey by Ms. Chisimond, who is now being protected by the Cuban government. I'm sure you've heard of her, Joanne Chisimond. She still is being shielded by the Cuban government from returning here on extradition. She was part of a subversive Black nationalist group in the 70s and 80s. We've had protests at the submarine base. We've had all kinds of accidents, Medal of Honor winners. Thomas Carney was struck and killed by a trucker, and it wasn't until they caught up to the truck, dusted away the actual dust, that you can see the actual imprint of his patch on the truck. And that piece of the truck is preserved at the academy for all to see, to make sure that we know that we have to be watching our backs while we're out there. This trucker was trying to perform what's called a dusting. That's to get close enough to a trooper to blow their hat off during a motor vehicle stop. And he got a little bit too close, obviously, killed Lieutenant Carney. It was after this that, at least upon the initial approach, that troopers did not have to wear their hats going up to a vehicle. Mayanus Bridge collapse, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The state police was on board for a good 18 months until that was rebuilt. The Cessnas came into play in the 80s, and we still use them today. I was in that actual plane. It's like a flying Volkswagen. I don't recommend it, especially in strong winds. The summer shootout, escaped prisoners from Tennessee at the prison, happened in the 80s. Trooper Savage was killed by a distracted driving salesman looking over papers in 1986. This is
Mark,
well
I'm
before-
gonna have to interrupt. Got about 5 minutes to wind down so we can have some question and answer.
Okay. And, you know, as we go through these, you see the response to 9/11. We've actually lost 2 troopers to 9/11, Walter Green 2 years ago, Gene Barron 4 days ago, as many of you might have seen on the news. But you never know who you meet during your career. Several famous people have been around. You always want to be prepared. And as they say, take pictures, save business cards. There's great memories. And it wasn't that long ago in 1993 that I graduated, and then I'm on patrol, and then I'm an academy instructor, a sergeant, a lieutenant in narcotics. Somehow my wife got into the 58 Ford at the St. Patrick's Day Parade, get to the National Academy in Quantico, and you look over your shoulder, you look back on your career and you say, wow, that went by quickly, 26 and a half years. And this was my last assignment, a police shooting in the town of Danbury on July 4th of last year, 2019. And these folks do become family to you. That's my daughter, and that is my assignment with my troopers assigned to selections and training. And it goes by so quickly, you never know what's coming next. So,
All right, Steve, you're gonna have to handle the questions, and because I can't see who's, I see hands up, but I can't see who's doing it. So, Steve or Carl, one of you two guys, take the first questions first.
Lloyd, you have a question?
And yes, I was wondering, does the state police still have the virtue police group like they had in the 70s and the 80s when they patrolled or broke up prostitution rings on the rest stops?
yeah, so there was one of the, because we were compressed for time, there was one of the items that came up, and one of the slides actually talks about that detail specifically, where actually the Secretary of State's husband was caught up in that in the 1980s as kind of an embarrassment. Now it's really patrols that will go on patrol to check those rest stops. We don't have those problems like we had in the past, but we still maintain an organized crime task force. We delve more into the human trafficking end of it because most of these prostitutes that might be out there are actually victims of human trafficking and not criminals themselves. They're forced into a type of sex slavery because of the human trafficking element. And that doesn't just go for foreign nationalist type of groups. That's our runaways. I did time as our representative of the missing persons unit and continue to teach missing persons to this day. So those patrols go on with the organized crime task force and the missing and exploited children task forces that we have that are out there.
Larry Berger?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. With this student from University of Connecticut that was just captured, did you have any justification? Did you have any, once he left Connecticut, does the state of Connecticut have any justification to go into and help in these other states? And do you have any more background on what you did actually to initially after they went after this fella?
So a lot of my information is open source, but I do have some contacts that are still there to kind of keep me posted on what's going on. And from what I know, he murdered somebody in Wellington, place I'm very familiar with. I was a sergeant out at Troop C in the Tolland area. stole a vehicle, goes to an old friend's house, murders him, kidnaps his girlfriend, takes his car, drives to New Jersey. He dumps the car off there, takes an Uber into Pennsylvania, and somehow or another steals a car, gets down into Maryland, and there we are. The troopers would have the ability to continue on into those states in what's called hot pursuit. But once that person is captured in that state, we don't have the right to take them back to Connecticut until we get an extradition order because of the state boundaries. But we can assist, we can continue into those states. There are compacts that we have with those states. One of the specific compacts that we have that we used often for many purposes, training purposes, and also investigative purposes, is the New England State Police Administrators Compact, which allows us to be cross-sworn to other states for emergencies and big events. When the Democratic National Convention was being held in Boston a few years ago, there was troopers from all 6 states that were working that event because Massachusetts State Police couldn't handle that in and of itself alone with the other responsibilities they had within Boston, the highways, and the other surrounding communities.
Stu Madison?
I'm sorry?
Thanks for a great talk. Really very, very interesting. Something caught me. I'm an IT kind of a guy. You mentioned early on that when you talk about the canine unit sniffing out something with software. What's
Yes.
that all about? What's that all about?
So these canines are trained to find, because we know that criminals, especially when they're involved in narcotics, organized crime, and especially child exploitation, child pornography, they will hide those images, they will hide that evidence on thumb drives, on computers, on alternate devices, portable hard drives, cell phones, what have you. And these canines are trained, they've developed that sense of smell that is specific to chemicals that are within the hardware of these thumb drives and other modes of communication, to sniff them out, because we might overlook them during a search of a residence or even a search of a person. The dog can train in on that and locate that for us.
So they're really sniffing out hardware, really, and it happens to be files on those
Correct.
devices.
If I said software, I probably misspoke. Is the hardware. Software
Gotcha.
would be kind of tough unless it's a really, really smart dog.
That's why I was curious.
Joe Raccanello?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Good presentation. I'm sure we all enjoyed the history related to the state police as well. I know you mentioned drug enforcement.
Yes.
I was curious if you had an opinion related to the legalization of marijuana. I know a lot of states, of course, you know, they've legalized marijuana, and it's there are a lot of pros and cons related to it. I was wondering, from a law enforcement standpoint, your thoughts on that subject.
I have strong opinions on that because I did work narcotics for so long. I was in charge of our marijuana eradication program for homegrown marijuana here in Connecticut. Spent many days out in the fields with a machete and bug spray and bug nets, chopping down plants and even indoor grows. I think there could be a place for that, but the legislation and the regulation is not consistent with what is actually out there, what is actually a problem. What is overlooked is that marijuana itself, the hypotropic agent 9-THC, is much stronger in the strains of marijuana today than it was in the 70s and 80s. Marijuana has 400 carcinogens in it, in addition to the useful drugs, such as useful elements in it, such as CBD and the psychotropic drug of 9-THC. There's also inherent aspergillus mold that comes with marijuana that, unlike, say you were working with insulation in your attic and you get that in your lungs, they can flush that out of your lungs. It's going to be a painful event, but they can flush that type of stuff out of your lungs. The Aspergillus mold, because of the way it's shaped, the molecules it's shaped, it adheres to the lungs. You can't get it out. It causes lung cancer, and it's over. And that's before you smoke it. That's just being around it. And if you're not treating for that, and many of these places take shortcuts, many of them are very well regulated. Many of them take shortcuts though, and you have those hazards. But one of the biggest fallacies that's out there is that if it's legal, it's going to be a big money maker for the states, and there is money to be made on taxation. So that could be a positive. But the other fallacy that's out there is that it will cut down on the illegal trade. It has only enhanced the illegal trade because the illegal trade is so regulated and so taxed, it makes it that much more expensive, that the black market, and specifically the Mexican cartels, have gone directly into these states that are legal and have undercut the legal trade and have become more violent in protecting their illegal trade, black market trade of marijuana that's out there. So it has not cut down on that. I do believe in the decriminalization because to put somebody behind the 8 ball for a simple possession charge that will carry the rest of their life, I think that is unfair. But there's also no marijuana prisoners, as they call them out there, that are in jail for life solely based on a marijuana conviction. There's something else that is an underlying charge that they had previously or in relation to the charge. So it's just not true. It's propaganda that's put out there by the marijuana industry, which, by the way, is the same people who own the tobacco industry. It's just another way for them to make money.
Okay, these are the last three questions that are up there. I don't know who they are, but
Larry Holtzman. You got to unmute you, Larry. Can't hear you, Larry. Unmute yourself. I can't. There we go.
Regarding patrol car driving and high-speed chases, is there any speed limit when you're doing routine patrolling for state police cars? And what kind of training do you have for high-speed chases?
Emergency Vehicle Operations course is one of the 17 core courses that are taught at the Academy. It's approximately 100 hours worth of training. There's no speed that is deemed too high or too low. It's always what is safe. What is the risk outweighing the reward? Unfortunately, we've seen, especially in this area here in Fairfield County, an increase in car burglaries over the last couple of years. That's really due to the raising the age of the juveniles. So juveniles used to be an adult at 16, now they're an adult at 18. So they continue to commit crimes, especially car burglaries and car thefts. Inevitably, they get on the highway. They don't stop when they're being stopped, and a chase ensues. And our pursuits in 2016 and 2017 are the numbers that I have available. They went up 21 and 24% respectively. The average charge for that is it's a felony to steal a car, but is it a dangerous felony? Are these armed and dangerous fleeing felons? And if somebody gets killed as a result of the accident, an officer can be held both criminally and civilly liable for that. And the standard of a burden of proof standard is going to be, did the risk outweigh the reward that was out there? The average price of these cars that are being stolen is $6,000. And I would tell my troopers, is it worth your career? Is it worth your house, your swimming pool, your livelihood to chase after someone for a $6,000 car that the insurance company is going to pay for anyway? If they've injured somebody, if they've murdered somebody, if they are a nuisance to the road, all bets are off, because that's when the reward is going to outweigh the risk for public safety. But that's what troopers are always weighing. Motorcycles cannot be involved in pursuits. That's a statewide pursuit policy. So our motorcycle troopers and the motorcycle officers in the local department cannot pursue in a motorcycle. It's just not safe. And to chase motorcycles, it's just kind of an unwritten rule. We're not going after motorcycles. We can't catch them. They can go almost 200 miles an hour. Our cars will, top out about 130. There's no way we're going to chase them and catch them, and it's too dangerous.
Sheldon,
Did you mention that recently some people had died as a result of 9/11?
Yes. So this is a phenomenon that is happening throughout the tri-state area, and to include Pennsylvania, so really a quad state area. Several officers responded to 9/11 that were not necessarily NYPD or PAPD, the Port Authority Police. There's been 68 identified specific cancers that are linked to 9/11 by being in that area, and you'll see the advertisement on television from Baruch Law offices. They're handling most of those claims. The claims are being paid out by a victims' compensation fund, which includes monies that are coming from Saudi Arabia as a result of them being responsible or complicit with some of these attacks, some of these folks that were responsible for the attacks. These cancers have developed years later, and they continue to manifest themselves, and it's because of their assignment at 9/11. We had troopers that were doing family liaisons because many families were here in Connecticut, and they were driving them back and forth to the morgue, to the family reunification center. We had troopers that were on the pile with their dogs, searching with the cadaver dogs, searching for bodies. And we had troopers that were doing general supplemental patrol with NYPD, New York State Police at the time. We've lost 2. I know of at least 7 that have these cancers. Most of them are retired now. And it is because of, the air that was breathed. And I was able to kind of use that for myself. I know we all complain about these things. I put this on the airport in February when everyone was saying you don't need masks. And I kept saying, well, they told us the air was clean at 9/11. And a month later, they said everyone has to wear a mask. So that experience led me to believe that what might be stated on a day-to-day basis might not be accurate. You have to protect yourself. And as much as we hate to be masked up and distanced, and I really wish we could be doing this at the senior center in person, we have to do this to keep ourselves safe. And
I have a friend who recently died of pulmonary fibrosis.
Yes,
as a result of helping out there.
That's one of the conditions that are there. And there's compensation funds, not only from the private funds, but many municipalities and states also have benefits that will benefit the families, the survivors of that.
hey, Stu Madison, this is our last question.
Thanks again. I was curious, when a crime occurs, what determines whether the state police or the local police work on that case?
So if a crime occurs in an incorporated town, it's going to start with that local police department until their resources are exhausted. Now, there are times when the state's attorney within that geographical area court may call the state police or another entity in because of the complexity of it, because of the jurisdictional piece of it. Federally, sometimes federal agencies will get involved because of the federal crimes that are there. But they always start at the local level, and they may blossom out because of a number of different factors, whether it's resources, whether it's conflict of interest, whether it's because of multiple locations. This incident that was in Wellington is covered by the state police, but now it goes down to Ansonia, which is a local police department. It's the same person. We're looking at the same chain of events, the same commission of crimes. So while Ansonia Police Department was the initiating police department, or actually it was Derby, right? It was Derby, I believe. They deferred over to the state police because of the current ongoing investigation with that suspect coming from Wellington, going to Derby, and now moving into New Jersey and eventually getting caught in Maryland.
Would that be the reason state police took over after the Newtown incident?
Newtown was a matter of resources. Newtown Police Department is a very good police department. But in an event like that, where there's 26, it's actually 27 victims when you count the mother, there was multiple crime scenes because it was there was the house on I think it was Arundel Road where the mother lived. There was the crime scene obviously at the school. Newtown Police Department has about 40 or 50 officers. The state police department at the time had about 1,200 officers with 3 dedicated major crime units that could handle those. I could do an entire presentation on Sandy Hook and what was done there. I was there for a week in an administrative capacity, not tied to the major crime, but there's so much more that went into that investigation and the support of the families. And just the overwhelming, even for our folks, we had folks that were there that were not part of the investigation because they were tied too closely to it. You had investigators coming from the Central District and the Eastern District to assist the Western District because of the overwhelming nature of the event, the trauma that several of our detectives and first responders were victim to.
Oh, maybe we can save that for another presentation if you'd like to do that.
Joe, you know, for you, the world.
Mark, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. You know, the state police been there, but I think, you know, going into the history and some of the facts really open our eyes to the organization and what it does. So I'd like to, on behalf of our membership, thank you for a great presentation today.
Thank you for having me, Joe. And this is the best part of state police history is when I get to put this hat on that says state police retired. So,
you know, I had to wait till I was in my 70s to retire. You're a kid still.
Yes. Well, thank you all. It's really been my pleasure and my honor to be with you. And as Joe said, perhaps something in the future, and it will be in much closer contact. But thank you again.
Okay. Great. Okay, Steve.
Okay, going to close off the meeting.
Bye.